If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what weird things have you seen/experienced in your life that you can't logically explain to this day? On a rural highway at 10 p.m. I thought I saw police lights up way ahead on the highway, but as I got closer, I figured it was just some lunatic to do. I decided to drive further into the hills, and about 2 miles in the middle of the woods, was a giant, deep blue light. It scared us so bad that I slammed on the brakes and flipped the car around. We returned to that same spot with other friends over the course of the next year. We could never figure out exactly how to get to the light, but it was always sitting in the exact same spot. Eventually, after a year or two, when we returned, the light was gone. I never figured out what it was or how to get to it. Also, we tried going there during the day a few times, and it was too difficult to get there. I have a farm and was feeding the animals with my husband one evening this past winter. He left before me to go to the house, and I decided to go give my favorite cow scratches before going in the house. As I was in the field, I looked down at the barn. The house was behind me. It's a long walk between the two, and saw my husband come out of nowhere and go into the barn. I was so confused because I had just seen him go into the house a few minutes before. So I walked down to the barn to find out how he got by me to go to the barn without me seeing him, and no one was there. The lights were off, and it was pitch black. I know I saw him walk in there. You can't miss him. He is a big, athletic guy. I immediately started to freak out internally, and I walked up to the house. He was in the living room, sitting on the couch. He never went back to the barn. It was such a strange and bizarre experience. My Navajo friend told me the truth about skinwalkers. It's not as outrageous as most stories make it out to be. She told me a story about a couple on the reservation who had a baby who, after having people over, got really sick really fast. They noticed the baby's hair had been cut off in one area. They found the stand of hair bound with some other stuff somewhere in their house, as well as a part of the baby's clothes that had been cut off. I think she said that they had to burn it to stop the curse, but she basically explained that skinwalkers are witches. If I remember correctly, they cannot leave the reservation either. I also had a therapist who was Navajo, and she refused to even say skinwalker because they believed it would attract them to you. We live in Utah, BTW, where Skinwalker Ranch is. That place is so weird to me. When I was 12 years old, I woke up one morning and felt sick. I had to stay home and sit on our sofa. My mom was currently going shopping. Then, all of a sudden, my cats started looking at the wall and then at the sofa in my direction, as if they were following something with their eyes. Then they started hissing and meowing. I looked at the spot, but nothing was there. Then I looked around, and on the TV, which was on right now, I saw my reflection. But right next to me, I saw a man sitting on the sofa right next to me. I jumped up and screamed, but sure enough, nothing was there. I was so ducking scared, just like my cats, who wouldn't come out under the bed for a good 2 days. I was driving home down a country road at night with a friend when, in front of the car, she and I both saw a glowing sphere that was about basketball size and bright white in color. The sphere hovered in front of the moving windscreen for a second and then floated up into the air, still in view, before it started to accelerate away from view, when it disappeared. Needless to say, the two of us were dumbfounded and didn't know what to make of what we saw. But before we could even really discuss our sighting, a similar orb appeared, this time about 50 feet in front of or to the left of the car. Since that night, I have searched online for possible explanations and haven't really come up with much, but your experience sounds fairly similar. When my grandfather died, my parents were in charge of cleaning out his old house. I ended up helping out a couple of times, and the night before we were finished, I had a dream about my grandfather in his basement, pointing at a spot behind the staircase. It was so vivid and real that I had to tell everyone about it. On the next and final day of cleaning, we went to the spot I was talking about. My dad ended up pulling back some old wood paneling and finding a bunch of old photographs of when my grandparents first moved into the house. I still get goosebumps when I think about it. I was staying at my aunt's house when I was 12 or so, having a sleepover with one of my cousins. It was probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and I woke up feeling like someone was watching me. I looked towards the door, and I saw a boy of about 5 standing there looking at me. He had brown, curly hair, blue eyes, chubby cheeks, and a birthmark on his left cheek. He was dressed for winter in a red and blue coat, even though it was July. He smiled and waved at me, then turned around and walked through the door. I told my aunt about it the next morning, and when I described him, she got this terrified look on her face and went to get a picture of a boy who looked exactly like I had described. He was my cousin, who had died on Christmas Day 1982. The picture was taken that day, after having suited up to go try out his new sled. They were getting ready to cross the highway when he broke away and ran across the street. He was hit by a truck that couldn't stop in time. I was only 1.5 years old, so I had no memory of him, and I lived hundreds of miles away, so I wasn't there that day. I used to work in music and tour with this band. The guitarist, Josh, and the band's best friend, Matt, had died a couple years ago. He always talked about the kid, and he seemed like a great guy. Josh always had this reoccurring dream where Matt was standing on this abandoned street, which, supposedly, was metaphorical for purgatory. Josh had all these conversations with Matt in these dreams, and because he had overdosed unexpectedly, he felt like his spirit was not able to move on. At the end of the dreams, Matt would take a bulb from the street light on the street they were standing in the middle of. Josh described these dreams in extreme detail, and I could pretty much picture what the street looked like. Fast forward to about 6 months into touring with these guys. They were huge Bright Eyes fans and wanted to stop in Cassadaga, Florida. Bright Eyes singer wrote an album there, and it's a really creepy, spiritual medium. It might be worth noting that 6/7 of the people I was with are all atheists. So we drive into Cassadaga around 2 or 3 a.m. and drive around. Suddenly, this big black dog comes in the middle of the road and just stops and looks at us. The guys in this band were weird as duck and were saying things like, "Follow the dog. It's trying to show us something." And in my mind, I'm just thinking they are all ducking idiots. We followed this dog for a few blocks, as it was walking pretty slowly. All of a sudden, we turn a street, and the dog bolts. We try to speed up, but Josh says, "Stop the ducking van. This is it." We are all confused, and he gets out of the van and looks around. This is it. This is the street in my dreams. We hung out for about 15 minutes, and from the way he described the street, from having houses on the left to a park on the right, it was definitely the street. As we get in the van, a street light goes off, and we just drive off. He claims he never had any more dreams about it, as that was closure on everything. We went camping with some friends, took a late night walk, and on our way back, we found a little flat spot near a steep hill drop-off. We all decided to lay down and just chat amongst ourselves while looking at the sky and all the stars. Since there was no light pollution and few clouds, it was clear and there were so many. After a bit, I pointed out to my friend that I was seeing a tiny light, no bigger than the stars around it, just moving from the right side of my vision to the middle, then diagonally down to the left, over and over again, without fail, in the same spot. I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from or going, and I tried rubbing my eyes and blinking a lot to see if I was just seeing shit, but it was still there. I told my friend that I was seeing this thing moving in a pattern from one side to the other, and she told me she was seeing the same thing and described exactly what I was seeing. We got kind of weirded out by it because no one else saw it, so we just kind of ignored it after that, and neither of us ever saw it again afterwards. This happened in, 2003. I was sleeping on the couch in my living room. My family just moved, and I didn't have my bed set up yet. Anyway, it was about 4 in the morning, and I heard panting, like a dog. I thought I was just dreaming of the sound because we didn't have a dog at the time. I tried to ignore the sound and go back to sleep, but it wouldn't stop. I listened to the sound and tried to figure out if it was the heater or something, but then I heard whatever it was walk across the floor to right behind the couch where I was sleeping. I distinctly heard the clicking of nails on the hardwood floor, and the panting grew louder. I lifted up my head, and the sound stopped. I have no idea what it was or what it could have been, but the story doesn't stop there. A couple days passed, and I was woken up by my mom in the middle of the night. She came down into the living room because she said that she heard what sounded like a dog get up and walk from beside her bed all the way out into the living room where I was sleeping. It still creeps me out when I think about it. I was walking home from football practice down the sidewalk. There was a woman about 200 yards away from me carrying 2-gallon jugs of milk. There were houses on the street, but they all had long driveways, so it would take about 15 seconds to walk from sidewalk to house. I dropped my water bottle and bent down to pick it up, but as soon as I looked up, the woman with the jugs was gone. There was nothing she could hide behind, and there was no way she could have gotten into a house that fast. Exactly in the space where she was standing was a little squirrel. I have no idea what happened, and I still can't wrap my mind around it. One time, I was following my brother from our grandmother's house to his house. Simple road trip, right? He has GPS, I'll follow. It'll be cool. Little did we know TomTom decided we wanted to go through the creepiest little towns. It gets about nighttime, and we start coming into this town, and we haven't seen a car in about 30 minutes. I was getting sketched out. So we come into this town, and we don't really see anybody. We don't even see many lights on and stuff, except in the middle of town. Near the middle of that town was a house with 2 police cars and an ambulance outside. The old lights were on, there were no sirens, though. I get more and more. Sketch the duck out. I haven't seen a single person, mind you. No one inside, no one outside. Not even a driving car. Until the last street light in the town. And a man is crouched down in the street light. Shirtless. Crouched. Eating something. From his hand. I hoped it was a sandwich. We get out of that town, and my brother calls me and instantly asks if I was as sketched out as he was. I was. He was. We all were. It was terrifying and zombie-esque. I was not ready for it. I cannot fathom what happened in that town to be that creepy. It scares the balls out of me every time I think about it. Oh, and then my brother said Tom wanted us to turn around. We missed the turn. Age 8, living in a house we moved into that I wasn't familiar with. It's late at night, me and my brother are watching late night TV, and my parents are asleep. I walk into the kitchen from the living room to see if there is a snack, and I see my reflection in the kitchen window. But it looks very weird. I freeze and just stare. I call my brother and ask him to come look without me looking away. He comes and looks at the window with me, and I just raise my arm and wave at my reflection. It waves back. I put my hand down, and my reflection still waves at me. Then it stopped and put its hand down. My brother tries it, but it doesn't work for him. We turned on all the lights in the house and locked every door. Next morning, Mom asks us if we went outside because the dog's chain was pulled through the kennel fence and hooked on his collar. We have no idea. Later in the same house, after coming back from a family trip, we had toys from the airport. They are little plastic planes that you hang from the ceiling by a string, turn on the motor, and they fly in circles at fast speeds. Mom tells me not to leave it going and to leave my room on the second floor. I do anyway. She tells me to go upstairs and turn it off. I go back upstairs and see that the plane is gone. I can't find it anywhere at all. A month later, find it in a tree 3 miles away, 80 feet in the air, tied to a branch. Years later, after moving from that house, a teacher of mine moved in and told me a weird story that happened to him at the house over the weekend. His kids were coming down for Thanksgiving and were supposed to show up Wednesday night after driving 4 hours from the airport. They are woken up at, 11 p.m. by hearing laughter, giggling, and jumping on their backyard trampoline. The teacher thinks it's from his kids. She sees them the next morning at breakfast and mentions, "Heard you guys jumping on the trampoline last night, you had a lot of fun." His kids look at him and tell him that they didn't get in until 3 a.m. because their plane got delayed, and they snuck in and went straight to bed. All I can say is that I truly believe that the house is the nexus, portal, wormhole, or whatever for weird shit to happen. When I was young, I would see faceless, formless people peeking around corners and looking at me until I turned my head to look at them. I only ever saw them as a blurry outline in the periphery of my eyes, but their movement and shape were unmistakably humanoid. This would happen often. However, I noticed it a lot more when I was alone. One day I decided to play a game with one of them, who would duck away every time I looked. So I would turn away and try to catch it unaware as it began to peek back out again. Every time I looked away longer, it would get bolder, peeking out further and further until I could see a shoulder, a torso, or a leg shuffle out. And eventually it would step out entirely and watch me through the doorway. At this point, I smiled and knew there was no way it could hide in time. So I whipped my head across to look at it and saw something that resembled an emaciated flesh morph suit. I would rather put this down to active imagination, because some things shouldn't be explained. I watched something walk out of the hallway, across the living room, and up the stairs towards my bedroom. There was nothing there, but there was something there. A stair creaked as it ascended. Being the dedicated skeptic I am, this did not compute, and it surely was just a moment of overactive imagination. Except my dog watched it happen along with me, growling and retreating as it passed her. The only reaction I could come up with was heading upstairs with a healthy dose of trepidation and saying out loud, "Listen, you can do what you like, but can you just stay out of my bedroom? That's crossing the line, okay?" It was not the most restful sleep that night. There was a hill where I used to live. I, at 11 to 13 years old, had a habit of sitting out on that hill for a good 30 minutes at night. I was an odd kid. I liked my peace and my quiet, and in the busy household I lived in, sitting to watch the night sky was pretty much the only way I got it. I sat out there one night for 30 minutes and was getting ready to leave when I heard someone say, "Beautiful night we're having, isn't it?" I took a moment to respond but eventually said yes, it is. I sat there for 10 more minutes, trying to elicit another response, to no avail. I know it was my mind making it up, probably because it was what I wanted to hear, but it's still very trippy to think about. My friend and I decided to visit our mutual friend at her university for the weekend. We set out in the early afternoon, after I finished my classes for the day. I was the driver for this trip. My friend and I had not done this drive before, so our university friend sent us detailed directions. We knew exactly which motorways to take, which shortcuts to take, and even which towns we could and could not speed in. She said the drive should take 3 hours. It was a smooth drive. We didn't hit traffic, and we never deviated from the directions my friend gave us. But the time just kept ticking later and later, and we were still a long way away from our destination. Looking back on the drive, I remember driving through the woods for a very long time. At the time, we didn't think much of it. I thought my friend had exaggerated how short the drive was or had sped down the highways. We finally arrived just in time for dinner. That 3-hour drive had taken at least an extra hour. We didn't think much of it over the weekend, or even when the drive back seemed so much shorter. But a few months later, when I went to visit again, the woods were gone, and the trip took 3 hours. Over the years, I made that trip half a dozen times, and I was never able to replicate that experience. I don't want to say it was supernatural, but I've also never been able to explain it. It's one of only 2 times in my life that I've experienced something I couldn't quite explain. When I was little, we used to visit my great-grandmother's house. Big 2-story plantation home, acres of fields, passed down for generations, etc. At the edge of the front porch, there were 2 massive rose bushes with a little cement walkway that let you walk around them and up to the porch. Every time I went over there, I'd go play by the bushes and get lost in them. I'm talking about walking in circles for hours on end, surrounded by roses, like that one scene in the movie Spirited Away. It never really scared me, and eventually I'd wind back up at the house by the small pond out front, ready to go inside for a drink. I never said anything about it growing up because it just seemed like something a kid would think up, but I mentioned it jokingly to my mom in high school when we were talking about how creepy that house was, and she mentioned experiencing the same thing, as did her older brother. Apparently all the kids that have grown up there have experienced the same thing over the years. I still think about that place a lot. I'd love to be able to go back someday and revisit it now that I'm an adult, but I haven't seen anyone on that side of the family in over 10 years. My parents live on 5 acres in Michigan, with the nearest neighbor about 3/4 of a mile away. Otherwise, it's all cornfields, creeks, and forests around them. In 2015, I was staying with them for a period of time, along with my dog. One night in early fall, after midnight and long after my parents were in bed, I was curled up on my bed reading. My dog was right next to me, head in my lap, sleeping, when I heard an incredibly loud, blood-curdling scream. This scream was unlike one I've ever heard. It sounded female and absolutely terrified, tortured, even. It felt like something horrific was happening to the person it was coming from. And it sounded like it came right from the living room, or at least from somewhere inside the house. If I had been the only one to hear it, I probably would have chalked it up to an electrical misfiring between my brain and ears or something else. But my dog absolutely heard it too. She went from snoring to being on full alert, hackles raised, and nose pointed at the bedroom door. Opening the door, she simply refused to leave the room and go check on the house with me. I think that scared me the most. Her aversion was visible. In 12 years together, I've never seen her hackles raised like that before or since, from neck to tail, like a rigid mohawk. She wasn't going to pass the threshold from my room to the hallway if she had anything to say about it. I did check the living room and all the other rooms. There was nothing. No animals are in the yard. My parents didn't hear a thing. But me and my best girl absolutely did, and I've never been able to explain it. When my family was moving out of one of our houses, my dad and I stayed late one night to finish packing up the master bedroom. We were disassembling their bed when we heard someone say my dad's name. In the moment neither one of us said something, we just kind of looked at each other, like, "Did you hear that?" But kept going. After a couple of minutes, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I asked him if he heard that, and his face went dead serious. I think he was hoping I didn't hear it so he could just brush it off. And we both just stood in silence for 5 minutes, listening and hearing nothing more. We had been having weird experiences in the house the whole time we lived there, but this was the most convincing. It was like the voice came from inside your head because it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. After our pause, we packed as fast as we could, and that was our last time in the house. We lived far away from other people, and nobody was around. The weirdest thing I have ever experienced that I can't explain. We later learned that not the previous owner but the one before had committed suicide in the house. It always had this eerie atmosphere, like you were being watched and that the space wasn't yours, like you were in someone else's house. We talk about it every couple of years. I keep my cat's bowls up in one of the bar areas during the summer since I tend to get ants. One morning, I went to fill their bowl and found that it was missing from the counter. I briefly searched for it, thinking my cat knocked to the floor out of protest for it being empty, but after searching the immediate area, I couldn't find it, so I fed them in another bowl. After work, I started a more intensive search and basically looked through my entire, small, condo, but it was completely missing. I was a little bit worried because I live alone, so things moving on their own or without my knowledge are definitely concerning in a number of ways. About 2 weeks later, I was sitting on the couch when I heard a crashing sound behind me. I got up to check and found the food bowl sitting on the counter, with food still in it. I seriously have zero explanation. There is no place for it to have been hidden or tucked into because it's literally a flat counter. There is nothing above it for it to have fallen from. There is no way food would still have been in it had it been sitting there for 2 weeks because my cats are fetasses. The counter is literally in full view at every point in the condo, except for the bedrooms. I have tried to rationalize it, but I just can't. One time when I was little, my mom woke me up from a dead sleep in the middle of the night to ask if I had used the bathroom across the hallway. I said no. She said that either me or my brother must be lying then because he also said he hadn't used the bathroom, but she heard running footsteps in the hallway. My mom went to both of our rooms to ask us who used the bathroom because when she walked outside her room to tell whoever was running to be quiet, the hallway was empty. It couldn't have been my dad because he was away on a business trip. Just as she was starting a lecture about not waking people up at night, the running footsteps were heard again and again, and there was no one in the hallway. I still remember sitting up on my bed, looking through my open door into the pitch black hall with the pounding of the disembodied footsteps. The worst part was that they sounded like they were coming towards my room. A bonus one that was eventually debunked: in the same house as where the footstep story happened, we have an old piano in the downstairs living room. I'd be woken up at night by the sound of piano keys banging loudly and chaotically. The rest of my family would hear it too. For a while, I thought we had our very own haunted piano TM, like the haunted houses in movies. But it turned out that a family of mice had moved in somewhere deep within the instrument, and they'd run across the keys at night. I was only 6 years old when this bizarre glitch in my memory occurred. Even I, myself, don't want to believe that this really happened out of grave fear, just like the people, including my family, have told me. In 2010, my mother gave birth to my little sister. She suffered greatly during her postpartum since my stepfather is a total ashole who uses alcohol as his main source of lifeline. As was the case, me, my mother, and my 4-month-old little sister are always left alone from morning until night. I, the new older sister, sensed my responsibility to at least take care of them by doing little chores like cleaning and running errands. On one usual night where I was tasked with babysitting my sister while our mother was preparing dinner, one significant detail of that time really stood out to me as strange. It was quiet. Our surroundings are just too quiet. Our house is located in a desolate area, however, even without that many people around as our neighbors, the sound of crickets, frogs, and the rustling of the grasses is still evident. But that time just had nothing. I was too young and distracted to think deeply into it. After some time of playing with my little sister, I noticed her diaper getting wetter and heavier. I called my mom to do the job. She came up to us calmly, rummaging the baby stuff beside our bed, when I noticed that there wasn't any spare diaper left. I volunteered to go and buy some since there are stores nearby down the street, and regardless of how deep the night is, I was confident with the street since there are few people around our place anyway. My mother was skeptical about sending me off, but she still agreed to it. I tidied myself up, got up from the bed, and went out of the room. My mom was left inside as she returned her attention. She was cleaning my little sister. After our bedroom, we walk a short distance towards our living room, where a big sliding glass window serves as its facade. There are no curtains at that time because maybe we had done the laundry that day or something. Our main door is just beside this huge window. There is only a single, yet really bright, light on our doorstep, lightening up the terrace of our house. Walking towards this door facing the sliding window, I froze. I was only staring at them because it is just really hard for me to understand the situation. I wanted to holler and call out my mom, but I just couldn't out of fear that those things would come inside. As far as my memory can reach, I believe that there are 4 creatures sticking their faces bare in the sliding glass window, staring straight at me. One is a small childlike thing, the other is a woman who had her mouth open wide with pale skin and black hair, and the other is just a blurry horror I don't want to and can't even remember now, frozen from shock. I can't utter a single word for my mother to at least notice me. I just stood there, trying to call Papa Jesus silently in my mind. We're Catholic. When I finally had the courage to close my eyes for a brief moment, I tried to calm myself so as not to cry. When I slowly glanced over the window again, everything was just gone. Our sliding window illuminated a vague reflection of mine and showed me the view of our garden outside, just like it used to be. As if there was nothing unusual that happened at that time. I tried to tell my mother, but she just laughed it off and said that maybe my nightmares were just too extreme, to the point that I was just scaring myself. But that memory was too vivid for me to lump it as just one of my boogeyman dreams. I can never forget how I had my hands trembling and my desperation trying to pray that those creatures would never dare move and go inside our home. When I was around 5, I had to go to a wedding for some family I'd never met. We were staying at the house of my great aunt, and I had a room with my cousin. I cannot remember why, but one night, super late, I woke up. It was just bright enough in my room to see because of the nightlight I'd gotten from home. When I looked over to the open doorway, I saw a little black Yorkie dog staring at me from the hall, in the center of the doorframe. It wasn't floating. I was just standing there. I didn't move or try to approach it. It walked away after a little bit, and I went back to bed, wondering when the dog had gotten there. When I got up the next morning, I asked my family where the dog went. Everyone was confused and told me that there weren't any dogs in the house. I insisted that I'd seen one, and I wanted to pet it, but I was continually told that there was no dog. To this day, I still don't know what that dog was or why it was there. But I swear, I saw it because I was staring at it for 10 minutes before it left. People still don't believe me and blame it on my tired little mind. But I know what I saw. One more. I was in high school back in 1998. I called one of my friends at home. This is before everyone had cell phones. He was an only child, so I know it was him that I called and talked to. Anyway, I had a 5-minute conversation with him, and he was acting very weird on the phone, being very short with me, giving strange responses to my questions, etc. Well, I was trying to find out when he was going to go pick me up for the Urge concert, again, in 1998, as it had already started and I had no ride. He said he wasn't going. I found another ride and got to the concert, only to see my friend there with our other buddies. I was all, WTF, bro? He swears to this day. 14 years later, he never talked to me on the phone, nobody was home at his house, and I have verified sources that he had been at the show when that phone conversation happened. Who the hell did I talk to on the phone? Very strange, kind of scary. Last fall, I truck camped at my archery hunting spot one night after work so I could be out hunting at daylight. I had camped in this spot a few times before, and it always felt just a little weird, but I didn't think much about it. It's in the sagebrush juniper high desert in the middle of nowhere, an hour from a paved road and 5 miles up a rock 2-track that is virtually untraveled by anyone but me during archery season. There's a natural spring, a good wide flat spot, and some old loose rock foundations up against a hillside nearby from early Chinese mining labor settlements. Instead of messing with a tent, I just set myself up a nest in the back seat of my truck, full-size 4-door, grab a beer, plug in my laptop, and start a movie to wind down, Super Troopers, not Texas Chainsaw Massacre or anything. About a half hour later. Thump. Someone jumped in the back of my truck. It wasn't that I heard something and started wondering about it, or that I thought I saw something moving and got myself freaked out about it. I felt the truck move with the weight and heard the noise of someone climbing in. I didn't even question, for a millisecond, what had happened. I grab my .45, throw the door open, and shoot out from under the sleeping bag/blanket pile I had moments before quietly chilling under. Nothing. The open door turns on a cargo light, which shines right into the bed of the truck, and there clearly isn't anything in it that isn't supposed to be. The moon is out, and in this country, that means you can see remarkably well for quite a distance. Nothing but sagebrush. As I come to grips with the fact that there is no one else around, my brain starts throwing facts at me. The only road in here is clearly visible from where I am, and there is absolutely no way someone could get here without me knowing it unless they walked a couple miles in the dark just to scare the shit out of me. I slowly calm down, open a beer, open the truck. It's not morning, and there isn't anyone there. Somehow, until that moment, I had forgotten about the shenanigans from earlier in the evening. When I suddenly remembered them, every fiber of calm in my body tried to evacuate directly out of my tightly clenched rectum. I instantly threw everything I had taken out of the truck into the bed, jumped in, and drove out. I spent 3 hours driving around, drinking coffee, listening to the radio, and waiting for daylight. I obviously never camp there again, and even when I go near that spot at high noon, I get creeped the duck out. I was about 12 years old. My friends and I went to a neighboring village because the other day we found out that there was a cool abandoned place there. We were 6 to 7 people. This place was on the outskirts of the village, in the middle of the wasteland. There were no houses around, only a field with dry trees. That house consisted of 3 floors, a basement, a first floor, and a second floor. It turned out that there was no opening from the front door, and we had to climb through the window along the branches of a single tree because the windows were high from the ground. There was no furniture inside, even no glass in the windows, only a brick frame. There were 2 ways to get into the basement. 1. Outside, on one side of the house, there was a small window, about 40 centimeters. If you climb through it, you will find yourself in one of the basement rooms. 2. On the ground floor, there was a 3 by 3 meter hole in the floor. The hole led to the cellar. In the same place, there should have been a staircase leading to the second floor, but the space was empty. There were no stairs to the second floor, that is, we would not have been able to get there. No one could get there unless, of course, you have a 10-meter stepladder. We were standing near the hole, and my friend bent down to look where it led. Just as he leaned over, a piece of brick flew a centimeter from his head and fell into the hole. It seems like nothing happened. The house is old, it's okay. But the bottom line is that this piece was flying at a 45 degrees angle and was flying at the speed that rocks fly when you throw them, which could not have happened, all things considered. It looked like a brick had been thrown. There was no way he could fall at that angle. Above was a brick ceiling about 4.5 meters high. If a piece of brick fell off, it would fall right on the spot it was hanging over. Even if he fell somehow crooked, he could not fly at such an angle. Behind me was the same brick wall, about 5 meters away. He could not physically fly from the wall to the edge of the hole where my friend was standing. A friend stood over the hole alone. We were all on the right at a distance of 5 steps. We walked around the house before that. Several times, there was no one there. I then filmed everything on the camera of a push-button telephone, but I saw the brick itself with my own eyes. It still stands in my memory. I don't know what it was, but when I watched the video later, I felt terrible. It was a miracle that the friend leaned over just at the moment when the brick threatened to fly into his head. I don't know what we would do because there wasn't a soul around, and I didn't even know how to explain to the ambulance the place where we were for the first time. We then quickly left there, although the friend did not fully understand what frightened us so much because he didn't see what we all saw. We then stood at a distance of 10 meters from the house and looked through every window, in the hope that someone would still come out. This went on for about half an hour, but no one was there. Later at night, I often had dreams about this house. One of them was repeated many times, a woman with a white disfigured face with a scarf on her head, black eyes, and a white tunic, standing in the window through which we climbed. Then I was a little scared to go back there. But nothing else strange happened. Once, while walking to work, 4 p.m., I noticed a couple walking in front of me. She was leaning her head on the guy's shoulder as they walked. He wore an army jacket and a tank top. I ended up walking behind them for a good 10 minutes because I was going in the same direction. Then, they turned towards a fence that leads to our train tracks. And kept walking, and walking, and walked tight through the fence, down to the tracks. I rushed over, thinking that wasn't possible, rigged the gate, and looked for holes. Nothing. They passed through like butter. And when I used my phone light to check the tracks, they weren't there. It's been several years, but I feel I might have seen 2 spirits still in love even after death. I used to live on the countryside, around an hour's drive from anywhere with a lot of light. The light pollution was non-existent, or at least it seemed that way. What blew my mind was the amount of light moving around the sky. Of course some are aircraft, but then there's the one that moves at breakneck speed, turns 45 degrees in an instant, and continues at that same speed without slowing down. But the most amazing one was when I and 3 others were walking back from a friend's house. It was really dark, and we were about 15 at the time. This giant silver orb was glowing as bright as the moon, really high up. Suddenly it spirals, 10 orbs move away, and it does a kind of display above us for around 20 minutes. Then all of the orbs gathered back as one, and it shot up into space in seconds. Whenever I tell people from densely populated areas, they seem amazed by it, but where I lived, everyone saw them, and no one seemed to care in the slightest. It was just the norm. I was home alone looking after my parents' house farm for a week while they were on holiday. One of the things I was required to do was feed chickens. In a shed, Mom had 3 big drums, 1 for feed and 2 for grain. Every day, I would go in and fill a bucket, half with feed and half with grain. I always took grain from the bin nearest the door because it was closest, and I am lazy. On about day 4, I walk in, fill a bucket half with feed, and open a bin to get grain. It's empty. I just stood there for 30 seconds, trying to figure out how it could be empty and where the murderer who was ducking with me was hiding. After 30 seconds, I decided I was safe and probably walked very cautiously to the other side of sheet and opened the second bin of grain. It was about 3/4 full, so I filled the bucket, fed the chickens, and hid the duck inside my house. The next day I wake up, go to do it again, fill up with feed, go to get grain from the far bin, and holy Jesus, pancakes are ducking empty now too. Wondering what the heck I should do, I start to leave, only to notice as I leave that the bin by the door has its lid slightly off, and I can see that it's goddamn full. When my parents get home at the end of the week, I mention this to my mom, and she just looks at me very strenuously and tells me that only one of the bins ever had grain in it, the one beside the door. Which means that someone must have come in on day 4 and switched the goddamn bins and then come back that night and switched them back again for the next morning. That or I am just going crazy. It doesn't seem very big, but it freaked me the duck out, and I still don't know how it happened. I was using my computer in my basement in high school. I heard the sounds of something fall, and then immediately after, the pitter-patter of small footsteps down the hall. I knew it was my little brother spying on me or generally trying to screw around. When he was younger, he would often lie in wait and pop out and ambush me with Nerf guns. I waited a minute for the imminent attack, and nothing happened. I then called out his name and said that I knew he was down there, so he should come out of hiding. I didn't hear any response, so I rounded the corner out of the basement computer room and snooped around the hall and rooms, trying to find him. I couldn't find him, and I thought that was pretty weird, so I ran upstairs. I doubted he was up there because I didn't hear him run up the steps. I saw my mom and said to her, "Tell little bro, nice try." She looked at me and said, "What do you mean? He's been asleep for a while now." That immediately weirded me out, so I went to his room to check on him. He appeared to be sleeping. I shook him and said, "Hey, nice try down there, what were you doing, spying on me?" And then I realized he was legitimately asleep, and I had just woken him up. He has been sleeping for real, and I woke him up for real. No kid is that good an actor. My mom came in and got all mad at me for waking him up. I was pretty shaken by this realization, so I just said okay and went back downstairs. To this day, I have no idea where the sound of those small, unmistakable footsteps came from, and it still creeps me out. Sometimes there will be a point on my spine that will wake me up while I'm asleep. The only thing I can think of would be Kundalini, that's that Eastern thing. I don't know the intricacies of it all, but you've probably seen the picture. Guy in lotus posture with points along his spine illuminated, with it ending on his head at the third eye and above that on his crown. But for me, it never went to those other stations. It's always between my kidneys. And it's a trip. It's really a trip. It's a mixture of sleep paralysis and this pulsing energy in the back. I haven't found any other accounts of it. I've read people talk about Kundalini awakenings, but those rarely seem comparable. Those stories always seem more mystical than what I've experienced. Once, before falling asleep, I heard the word Galatians. Then the dream starts. And the dream was duck and odd. I wake up, and I can't move. This point on my back is pulsating. I can feel it move from one spot to my entire body like a wave. And inside my body, there's a dialogue happening between a woman's voice and my own. From my upper body to my lower body. The woman's voice emanating from within the upper body, my own voice speaking gibberish coming from the lower body. And then the dream starts. Strange dream. I don't feel like running through the dreams, but it's an odd experience. I think it's happened 3 times. The last time wasn't mystical by any accounts. The dream was of me having a job that I was proud of and a woman being interested in me. I'm working at the bar section of this gas station. And I'm talking to some friends. Dance hall type area. And I realize while I'm talking to these people that the room went silent. It's all silent, and everyone is staring at me. It's like they're waiting for me to finish. Everyone's staring. So I look up at them and walk towards them. And they all cleared a large area. And there's a line formed, not so much a line as a circle, and the people in this circle are holding hands. And they start to run around in a circle like a Sufi mystic dance. I wake up, and that pulsating feeling is taking over my whole body. It's odd stuff. When I was around 9 years old, I was at a family friend's party who had a daughter my age, and I had known her all my life. It was getting dark, and everyone was sitting around the fire pit, toasting marshmallows. My friend had a small fairy garden in her backyard and asked her mom if she could take some marshmallows to the garden for the fairies. Her mom agreed and gave her a little plate to put the marshmallows on. Of course I thought it was ridiculous, but I went with her along with another boy. We walked down the path away from the fire pit and the noise of the party and rested the plate in the middle of the little garden. As we began to leave, the boy stopped in his tracks. He ran over to the plate and called back to us, exclaiming that there were bites in the marshmallows, and my friend and I came to look, and so there were. Tiny little bites. Of course we thought he was ducking with us, so we told him to go back to the house, and we made sure he did by walking him there, not giving him any chance to touch the marshmallows. But when we walked back to the plate, there were even more bites. So many more. I think my friend never truly believed in fairies, because she was just as freaked out as I was. We checked all the surrounding bushes, and there wasn't a soul in sight. We tested it over and over again, and it would only take turning around for a few seconds, maybe walking a few paces, and by the time we turned around, there were more bites. And bits of marshmallow on the plate, as if they had taken too big a bite and left some, as my friend said. When we went back to the fire pit, no one believed us, but it only took showing a few of them, and they were just as baffled as we were. At some point, when we were in the garden, my friend turned and ran, explaining after I caught up with her that she had seen a silhouette of a young girl in the dark. For the rest of the party, we stayed with the adults, toasting marshmallows.